Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum, dear participants. Welcome to this 23rd session of Self-Improvement to the Quran series, which we began with the advent of Ramadan. The passage that we are going to read out today is from the third surah of the Quran, which is Surah Al-Imran, and verses 130 to 136 will be under discussion. The text and translation is what I'm going to read out now. يا أيها الذين آمنوا لا تأكلوا الربا أضعافا مضاعفة واتقوا الله لعلكم تفلحون واتقوا النار التي أعدت للكافرين وأطيعوا الله والرسول لعلكم ترحمون. Believers, if in future also you want God's help, do not consume this interest, doubling it many times over, and keep fearing God that you may prosper, and protect yourselves against the fire that has been prepared for the disbelievers. So this is the first part of the passage that we are about to study. And as you can see, it starts off with the verses of riba, specifically verses which tell us that you should not consume riba, doubling and tripling it, and doing it many times over. So people have generally thought that this verse actually refers to compound interest, or usury, as they would also say, that interest which is charged at an exorbitant rate. However, this is not a correct interpretation of this verse. The verse actually means that you should not charge interest, and that too in such a high amount. So this is a very special style that we also adopt in our own language. It's much like saying, well, don't speak a lie, and you're speaking a lie or you're telling a lie even in the month of Ramadan. So it doesn't mean that other than the month of Ramadan, lies are allowed. It only tells us that lying in the month of Ramadan is a grievous sin. So similarly, when it is said that don't charge interest, doubling and tripling it, it doesn't mean that if you don't double and triple it and you just charge simple interest, that would be allowed. No, this is just telling us the heinous nature of the crime itself, or the sin itself. So interest in itself is something which the Quran has said that it's an immoral transaction. So for us, we have been advised, and all scriptures advise that as far as loans are concerned, they should be used to help people and not to extract money out of this. So lending, basically, in our religion and in Abrahamic religions, is an instrument of helping out people and not earning money out of it. This is a premise that stands at the basis of all economic transactions which relate to our own economy, specifically in which banks are involved or personal trading is involved. So at all instances in the Quran, you will find that the Quran has made this distinction that consuming interest is something which is absolutely forbidden. And in an interest-based society in which interest-bearing transactions are still going on, we can clearly see that this is an element in which people who are charging interest, they are at fault. But people who are paying interest, or they are not at all taken to task anywhere in the Quran, which tells us that as long as interest-bearing transactions are going on in a society, paying interest is something which is not at all proscribed or prohibited. It is charging or consuming interest which is prohibited. However, once interest stands outlawed in a society, then of course both charging and consuming as well as paying interest would be regarded as outlawed. And this has a very deep impact if we analyze the fact that basically it's not interest. I mean, interest comes later. The first thing which Islam wants us to do is to use this instrument of lending as a help for people, whether it's personal help, whether it's help on the basis of some investment that you might be doing. However, there are areas in which investment can be made, and it cannot be called interest at all. If, for example, the instrument of principal secured financing is adopted, which means that if you invest money, and in that invested money, you tell the person with whom you have invested the money that you will receive a certain amount of profit. Any amount of profit could be predetermined. But if the business runs in a loss, then of course you would not charge anything. So this is what we can call interest, principal secured financing, in which your principal is secured, but you will only receive a profit if the person with whom you have invested, if he is doing a profitable business. Nonetheless, as the Quran says, "Wattaqullaha la'allakum tuflihun," that fear God in this manner, so that you may prosper. Do not go about charging interest, and this is a immoral and unethical practice. وَاتَّقُوا النَّارَ الَّتِي أُعِدَّتْ لِلْكَافِرِينَ. So one thing which is stated positively now is stated in a negative word, in a negative tone. So positively it was stated, وَاتَّقُوا اللَّهَ لَعَلَّكُمْ تُفْلِحُونَ, that fear God so that you may succeed. And then it is said that fear the fire which has been prepared for the disbelievers. And disbelievers, of course, they are used in this sense in the Quran. They refer to people who have intentionally denied the message of the Prophet which has reached them. They believe in the Prophet. They have absolutely no true opinion that he is a true Prophet, or the truth comes to them in a way that they are absolutely convinced about it. But in spite of being convinced, they end up denying it. So this is what makes them kafir, or to the extent they are going to be punished not only in the hereafter, as this verse says, but also in the times of God's messengers. Such kuffar, such disbelievers are taken to task in this world as well. وَأَطِيعُوا اللَّهَ وَالرَّسُولَ لَعَلَّكُمْ تُرْحَمُونَ, and remain obedient to God and His Messenger that you earn mercy. Again, this is something which is an exhortation. This is something which Muslims are told, especially if they have any double-mindedness in their selves, that you have to be devoted to the directive of God and His Messenger. And if you do so, then remember you'll earn God's mercy. So obeying God and His Messenger is, of course, mentioned here because in the times in which the Quran was revealed, Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam was right there in the society, and obeying him was like obeying God, as some other verses say. So he was actually governing the state that was set up in Medina. And before that, obviously, when he was in Mecca, things were different. But this surah, as we know, is a Medinan surah. So therefore, when the Prophet had migrated to Medina and the reins of the state were being governed by him, people are told that they must obey him as God's messenger, and now he is the head of the state as well. And then the next verse is a very, very moving appeal, as you can see from the words as well. وَسَارِعُوا إِلَى مَغْفِرَةٍ مِّن رَبِّكُمْ وَجَنَّةٍ عَرْضُهَا السَّمَاوَاتُ وَالْأَرْضُ أُعِدَّتْ لِلْمُتَّقِينَ, and run to advance to the forgiveness of your Lord and to paradise, which is as vast as the heavens and the earth, prepared for the righteous. So you see, if you have a slight, I mean, of course, the translation also gives the sense which is found in Arabic to some extent, that the appeal is so moving. It is so, it has such a element of emotion in it. It's like telling people that run towards God's forgiveness. Sari'u ila maghfiratin min rabbikum, run to advance to the forgiveness of your Lord and to the paradise which has been prepared for the believers and which is as vast as the heavens and the earth. So people are told that you are living in a society in which, of course, there are directives which are revealed to you through the Almighty, and of course in the Quran, and these directives are meant for your own welfare. And as far as your own welfare is concerned, all directives of religion, dear viewers, we have to understand this, as the Quran says on numerous occasions, that they aim at our personal purification. So tazkiyah is the Quranic word, which means that you have to be a person who is always on the lookout to purify his soul and his deeds, whether in the collective sense or in the individual sense. So this cleansing of our soul, this purity, this tazkiyah is the objective of all directives of religion. And whatever is directed to us, whatever we have been commanded, the essence of that command behind it is that if we undertake and follow those commandments, we follow the directives which are given, then the consequence would be that we would gain that purity in our hearts, purity in our souls, purity in our undertakings. And this is something which the Quran has beautifully depicted here as, when you do so, you run towards the forgiveness of the Almighty. And this is an appeal also. It tells us that in spite of obeying the directives of the Almighty, it does transpire that at times we fall short, at times we do some mistakes, some blunders. So therefore, this verse tells us that, well, if you do those blunders in trying to your best to follow God, then in spite of those blunders, your job is not to get disappointed or just lose hope. سارعوا إلى مغفرة من ربكم. Run and leap towards God's mercy, and His mercy is something which is, of course, which entails His forgiveness, and this forgiveness is something which, of course, would be a prelude to paradise. If you are forgiven, God tells us that the consequence of forgiveness is paradise. And about paradise, it is said وَجَنَّةٍ عَرْضُهَا السَّمَاوَاتُ وَالْأَرْضُ, that it would be as vast as the heavens and the earth. I mean, it's like if we glance at the heavens above us, if we glance at our own land, our own earth, we find an amazing, unfathomable spread of land and space around us. And this marvels us, this amazes us. So this is just a small comparison which tells us and gives us some idea of the fact that, look, the paradise with which you are being promised is as vast as God's, as the heavens and the earth that you see around you. And أُعِدَّتْ لِلْمُتَّقِينَ الَّذِينَ يُنْفِقُونَ فِي السَّرَّاءِ وَالضَّرَّاءِ وَالْكَاظِمِينَ الْغَيْظَ وَالْعَافِينَ عَنِ النَّاسِ وَاللَّهُ يُحِبُّ الْمُحْسِنِينَ. And these are people, of course, now the muttaqeen are being depicted. So they are those who, whether in ease or in hardship, even if they encounter any excesses from those upon whom they spend, they curb their anger and forgive people. So they spend in all circumstances. They spend whether in ease or whether in hardship, and they curb their anger and forgive people. These are the people who are thorough in their deeds. So it says, وَالْكَاظِمِينَ الْغَيْظَ وَالْعَافِينَ عَنِ النَّاسِ وَاللَّهُ يُحِبُّ الْمُحْسِنِينَ. So this is one of the hallmarks of believers, that it's not that they spend whenever they have money to spare. I mean, this is such a beautiful concept. The hallmark of a believer is that whether he is in scarcity, whether he is in any hardship, that doesn't figure in his habit of spending. So الَّذِينَ يُنْفِقُونَ فِي السَّرَّاءِ وَالضَّرَّاءِ, that whether they have the comfort, whether they have spare money or spare wealth, of course that is fine. And if they are in any discomfort, even then. So in all these circumstances, they run and they find opportunities to spend in the way of God. And when such a circumstance arises and people ask them, they don't scold them as a result. وَالْكَاظِمِينَ الْغَيْظَ, they control their anger. وَالْعَافِينَ عَنِ النَّاسِ, and also they are those who forgive people. وَاللَّهُ يُحِبُّ الْمُحْسِنِينَ. And then a very, very important aspect is actually delineated near the end of this passage. It says, وَالَّذِينَ إِذَا فَعَلُوا فَاحِشَةً أَوْ ظَلَمُوا أَنفُسَهُمْ ذَكَرُوا اللَّهَ فَاسْتَغْفَرُوا لِذُنُوبِهِمْ وَمَنْ يَغْفِرُ الذُّنُوبَ إِلَّا اللَّهُ وَلَمْ يُصِرُّوا عَلَى مَا فَعَلُوا وَهُمْ يَعْلَمُونَ. So one of their aspects is that they are people such that if they commit a lewd act, وَالَّذِينَ إِذَا فَعَلُوا فَاحِشَةً, some vulgarity, they accidentally end up doing some vulgarity or something which is evil to themselves, they remember God immediately, wastaghfirullah, and seek forgiveness for their sins. And who but God can forgive sins, and do not deliberately persist in what they have done. So walam yusirru ala ma fa'alu. So if they step in some vulgarity, if they do something which is like wronging their own souls, they don't persist in this sin for long. They realize as soon as they come out of this frenzy, and they seek God's forgiveness, and then they are not audacious on their sins. Walam yusirru, they don't insist on their sin. And as a result, when they don't do so, and they know very well that this is something which they should not do, walam yusirru ala ma fa'alu wa hum ya'lamun. So, and do not deliberately persist on what they have done. And then it says that as far as these believers are concerned, ulaika jazaohum maghfiratum min rabbihim wa jannatun tajri min tahtiha al-anhar khalidina fiha wa ni'ma ajrul amilin. It is these who shall be rewarded with forgiveness from their Lord, and with orchards beneath which streams flow. They shall dwell there forever, and what a grand reward this is for those who do righteous deeds. So the result, of course, is then depicted in these very powerful and potent words, that for them, the reward of their deeds is that they'll be forgiven, and then they will be made to dwell in paradise beneath which streams flow, and they'll remain in that paradise forever. And this is for those who do righteous deeds. So you see, the Quran always inspires us, it always motivates us that yes, if you spend, if you adhere to the principles that have been delineated, there might be problems, there might be hardships, but ultimately you will be rewarded with God's forgiveness and with the paradise that we just spoke of, which is as vast as the heavens and the earth. And another thing which is said here is that you'll be living here forever and forever. It is eternal bliss for you. And Nema Ajrul Amilin, and this is a reward for those who are the righteous. So this brings us to an end to this discussion on this passage, and we are now open for any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Dr. Shehzad, for this amazing lecture on a very relevant realm of affairs. I have a written question to kickstart the process of questioning. They are asking about performing salah while they are traveling either by car or by any public transport, and neither wudu can be performed nor the tayammum. So how can purity be achieved so that prayers could be offered? In another similar situation, when one finds themselves as ghusl being farad on them, but they couldn't perform, so what should be done for the prayers in both these cases?
So in both cases, I mean, tayammum suffices. And I don't find any reason that you would not be able to do tayammum if you're traveling. I mean, if you're traveling by road, if you're traveling in a car, if you're traveling in a train or any other means of transport, you can do tayammum from the sides of the car, from the panel that you have in front of you. So it's not that you always need a place like clay or mud before you. So the Quran tells us it has to be a clean surface, and that surface could be something which you have in your car as well. So tayammum is something which suffices both for ghusl and for wuzu in case both are needed. Either of them is needed, and so they can do so while traveling. And while traveling, we have been told in the Quran that farijalan aw rukbana, whether you are traveling by foot, even by foot, and whether you're traveling on a transport or on a conveyance, you can offer the salah.
Right, I believe it may have helped. Baran Nashur, you may ask your question now.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Sir, I have two questions. One regarding the riba aspect, because does that mean that taking a mortgage is allowed?
Yes, it does. You can mortgage your house, you can buy a car as a result of that, because in that case, you are not at all paying, I mean, you're not charging interest, you're paying interest. And the other thing that you might also like to know here is that in assets, the question of interest does not arise in even the first place. You see, basically, you are buying an asset, which is either a car or a house or maybe some other thing. And interest is only on consumable items, like, for example, if you were borrowing money. So in this particular case, even the issue of interest does not arrive. I mean, it doesn't even arise. Interest arises on transactions which are done on currency. So even if you had borrowed some money, then you were paying it back, that was absolutely fine because you would be paying interest. Because however, in this case, you're not even borrowing money. All that you're doing is that the bank or the organization has bought that thing for you, whatever that thing is, a house or a car, and now you're paying back. And whatever extra you're paying back is basically a rent on the thing that you are yet to become an owner of. So precisely for this reason, there are many countries, or at least a few countries, who call this settlement or this nature of agreement as a hire and purchase agreement. So it's in essence basically that if you bought something, and the installment that you're paying over and above is basically the rent of using that thing. So in the case of mortgages, as I said, the question of interest doesn't even arise in the first place. It would have arisen if you were borrowing currency, but in that case, as I said, again, you would be paying interest, which is not at all forbidden. So in both these cases, whether you've borrowed currency, you have borrowed money and you're paying back that money, or you've bought an asset and then you're paying over and above that asset in installments, in both these cases, I mean, in the first case in which you bought this asset, interest does not even arise. I mean, interest always arises in currency transactions. And in the case of a currency transaction, if you do borrow currency, then of course it would arise, but in that case, you would not be charging interest, you'd be paying interest, which is in itself something which is not forbidden.
Okay, but does that mean that as well, like if you are, for example, a student loan that you have to pay in like 35 years off, but you die in the process of paying the debt off, would that be considered that would that be a sin on you because you did not pay off your debt before you passed away?
You see, what happens is that in all such agreements, there is this provision which is made, and if you write if you see these standard agreements which are made between the organization and the student who takes the loan, they have all these provisions already set out, and they know that if the boy or the person who has taken the loan passes away or is inflicted with some accident, or if it's difficult for him to return the money even in 20 or 25 years. So these are stipulations that they already mention. So I think you should look up the agreement which they make, because they take into consideration all these exceptional circumstances, and they give you more concession in that. And the other thing is that at times, if a student is not able to pay it back, then he writes that either, I mean, he gives this undertaking that if I pass away or something happens to me, then the loan should be written off, or he says that, well, I have such and such savings with me, or such and such thing which I own. So if I pass away, so you can take the amount as much as is available from my leftover inheritance, I mean, which I leave behind. So these are some of the possibilities. But in general, all these agreements, they take into consideration such circumstances, and you can just look them up.
Okay, Naveed Irfan, you may go ahead.
मुझे ये जो रिबा के ताल्लुक से सवाल था कि मैं एक बिजनेस करता हूँ और उसमें कई बार कुछ लोगों को उधारी पे सामान देना पड़ जाता है, और उसमें एक मुद्दत तय होती है कि आप 3 महीने में पैसा रिटर्न कर देंगे, लेकिन कई बार वो 4, 5, 6 महीने हो जाती है। तो ऐसे केस में हम उनको फिर पेनल्टी का बोलते हैं कि आपको पेनल्टी लगेगी। तो कई बार तो वो उसके डर से जल्दी दे देते हैं, लेकिन कई बार फिर लेट ही हो जाते हैं। तो ऐसे में हम पेनल्टी अगर चार्ज करते हैं तो क्या वो इंटरेस्ट की शक्ल में आएगा?
Not at all. Penalty is absolutely justified. This is a transaction that you made with them, and it was a commitment on their part. So if they do not honor their commitment, you can penalize them. This is perfectly okay, and this will not be regarded as interest.
जी, और यही चीज अगर कर्जे हंसना के तौर पे किसी को दिया है और अगर वो नहीं दे पाए तो?
You see, it all depends the nature of the agreement. If that agreement is that you lent some money to a person and it was on easy installments, then obviously the person was liable to pay for it. But there has to be some provision when you lend some money, that what if a person is not able to do. So I think it depends on the agreement that you have made at the time of giving that loan. If the agreement says that the loan will be written off, or it will not be charged if a person becomes incapacitated or passes away or something happens, then of course it will be written off. But I mean, it all depends on the nature of the agreement that you make when you give that loan. And this is very important, that you do make an agreement with the person and also have it written down, so that both parties are clear that what the conditions of this loan are.
Thank you. Nadia, you may go ahead and ask your question.
Assalamu alaikum, Dr. Shehzad.
Walaikum assalam.
मेरा सवाल भी रिबा के मुतालिक है। हम रिबा अल नसिया और रिबा अल फद्ल को कैसे डिफरेंशिएट कर सकते हैं, और क्या ये भी इंक्रीज और जी प्लीज बस
riba in nasiya means riba on loan, and riba al fazl means riba on in which is not charged on loan, but is charged on the spot transactions. And this is basically a misnomer which has arisen because of not understanding certain narratives. Riba always is nasiya. It always is on transactions of loan. It does not figure in on the spot transactions. So it's like a misunderstanding which our fiqh actually has introduced, and there is no such thing as riba al-fazl. Riba is always riba nisya. And if you would like to have more details, I would refer you to my teacher Javed Ghamidi's research on this topic, which he has presented in his book Mizan, and has shown convincingly that riba al-fazl has arisen because of not understanding some prophetic narratives. Whereas riba is just of one type, and that is nisya. Nisya means loan. So it's always, on loan. It's never on transactions which are carried on the spot, like for example, at the same time, which does not involve a loan.
बहुत शुक्रिया। इसी से रिलेटेड ये इस्लामिक बैंकिंग का तस्वर है। हमारे पाकिस्तान में ख़ास तौर पे एक रवैया आ गया है कि जो नॉर्मल बैंकिंग ट्रांजैक्शन है उसमें चूंकि इंटरेस्ट इन्वॉल्व होता है, तो जो बहुत ज़्यादा ऐसे ज़रा रिजिड लोग होते हैं वो उसका बाइकआउट करते हैं। और ख़ास तौर पे ऐसे होता है कि जो लोग बैंक में जॉब कर रहे होते हैं ऐसे, तो उनका भी एक तरह से बाइकआउट शुरू कर देते हैं कि इनके घर खाना नहीं है, पीना नहीं है, या इस तरह से। तो ये इसको कैसे ट्रीट किया जा सकता है, उनको कैसे समझाया जा सकता है कि मतलब इससे मुतालिक मुझे प्लीज एजुकेट कीजिए।
I think it all depends. I've often said that always pick and choose your audience with which you'd like to indulge and engage in debate with, because these are things which often we Muslims have emotional attachment to, and the voice of reason seldom comes across us. So I would suggest that if you are engaged with people who would like to listen on the basis of reason and rationality and arguments, of course, then you can put forth and you can commence your discussion with them. But there are so many people who would not, who would not budge, who would not entertain any alternative opinion. So for such people, I would always advise that just ignore such people. Why would you like to convince people who are already convinced of something? So only people who are open to discussion, who are open to new questions in life, they are the ones with which you can engage in discussion. So this is a general principle. And as far as an attitude is concerned, for example, of not going to people who are doing bank jobs or not giving your daughter in hand to such people, I think this is again an extreme, because we have to understand that today banks have evolved into much, to a significantly different internal structure than they were when they were formed 2 or 3 centuries ago. Now, most banking transactions, although they still call them interest, they have in fact deviated from their original position, and now they have become more of financing loans and financing projects. And except for personal loans, which don't figure, there are very few areas in which interest remains in its original form. And I think it's just a change or question of changing the terminology in a lot of respects. We just talk about mortgage on a very similar basis. I think credit cards, which is a big service which banks give us, the only change that they would like to make, I think, or they should make, is that they should change the lending. The change that the amount that they charge when a person is not able to give the amount which is lent at the right time. And this they call this interest. However, you should change the terminology. And as someone asked us before me, that when you lend someone some amount and he is or she is not able to return it, then you can penalize that amount. That person. So credit card themselves, which they provide a great service to all of us, and people who don't return it within time, interest is charged for them. So instead of charging interest, what banks can do, they should change the name of interest and charge a penalty on them, which could be different for different amounts that you lend. And so I think that if you look at modern banking, the institution has evolved much more, and it is no longer that institution which was created out of interest. A lot of things have developed, and it's now more of financing. So I think it would be unwise to call people who are doing bank jobs as if they are doing something which is haram or prohibited. But I said all these things can only be discussed with people who are willing to undertake a discussion on something new which has happened. Other than such people, I would suggest that, it's always best to discuss topics which are other than religion with such people.
Thank you. Varanashur, you may ask your question now.
Sir, my second question was about the story of Jesus in the Quran, because, well, the story of Jesus in the Bible is that he was put on the cross, died, and resurrected 3 days later. And the Quran denies this story, that there was someone else to resemble him. But I listened to another lecture of you where you told that Jesus did pass away. So also, I want to talk about the Quranic story with Christian friends, but I don't know exactly what the truth is now.
You see, Christianity and Islam differ a lot regarding the death of Jesus, regarding the passing away of Jesus. to all Christians, whether they are Catholics or they're Protestants, that for them, he died on the cross, and it was this sacrifice that he gave, that if you just believe in this sacrifice that he gave, that your sins would be forgiven, as long as you believe in the fact that Jesus died for your salvation. However, the Quran has categorically denied his crucifixion, and the Quran states that وَمَا قَتَلُوهُ وَمَا صَلَبُوهُ, neither did they kill him nor did they crucify him. وَلَكِنْ شُبِّهَ لَهُمْ, but the matter was made muddled up for them. They could not get to know what exactly happened, and this perhaps was like a punishment for them. And the Quran at another occasion has said that he will be given, or he was given actually, natural death. And only the thing is that his body was never found. Perhaps the Almighty had just taken it away through his angels, and maybe they had buried him somewhere where people could not even know where he was buried, because there was a very strong chance that the Jews would mutilate his body or harm it in any way. So in order to have that sanctity restored, this was never allowed to happen. So the Quran says that, as I said, that he was given a natural death. But on another note, I would also like to tell you that, I mean, you see, discussing religion with another religious denomination is best when you start off with common grounds. Crucifixion is something which is perhaps the biggest difference between Christianity and Islam. And if you start off with these, yes, it's perfectly okay to say that what the Quran stance is, just to educate them, or maybe give them the surahs of the Quran which depict the life of Jesus. But if you would like to have a discussion with such people, I mean, you need to be very careful whether this should be the first or starting point of your discussion. I think the starting point should be monotheism, because both religions, they believe in one God, and although yes, Christianity has its own version of one God, they have this Trinity, which is not found anywhere in the Bible, but was basically a Pauline construct. Saint Paul of Tarsus, we know, was the one who was most responsible for this. Originally, there was nothing that we can find in the Bible. So I think, I mean, this is a simple thing that you can tell them. You can just look up or just Google the fact that how Jesus' life was, and it's mentioned in the Quran. You'll get the relevant Quranic verses from Google as well. But more important is that what topic should you engage in with your Christian friends, and what should be perhaps left to a later time.
Yeah, no, exactly. Yeah. So I did not really engage because I was not very sure what to say, actually. That's why I asked this question. But does that mean
I think one of the things that you might do is that instead of engaging in any discussion, just give them the Quran as a gift. Just give them maybe selections from the Quran, or maybe an introduction to the Quran. You'll find some of the books that we have authored, which they are like a primer to the Quran, which make you introduce you to the Quran before you read the whole book. They make you have a small idea of what topics and what the Quran deals with. So one of the things that is more recommended is that instead of we speaking to them, the best is let God speak to them by letting His scripture being read by them.
No, exactly. Yeah, that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to make them read about Islam and more.
Right.
But I was like, just to clarify for myself, does that mean that Jesus was never put on the cross and
yes,
never died on the cross? But
he never died on the cross. Yes, this is what the Quran says.
So, but did
he was given a natural death. He was
yes.
given a natural death. It was like a Quran says, "Inni mutawaffika," which means that I will give you death. وَرَافِعُكَ إِلَيَّ, and then he and take you away from them. وَمُطَهِّرُكَ مِنَ الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا, and then cleanse you from these disbelievers. And وَجَعِلُ الَّذِينَ اتَّبَعُوكَ فَوْقَ الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا, and people who follow you after you pass away will always remain dominant on those who do not follow you. So this is stated in the 55th verse of the 3rd surah very clearly, and it tells us how Jesus' whole life would be, has been depicted in the Quran.
Thank you. Mashallah Wasim, you may ask your question now.
Assalamu alaikum. My question is regarding last lecture. Which imanat Allah gave to us that we have to guard?
I think I explained this in detail. This amana refers to the freedom of choice that we were given, the freedom to exercise our own will. This free will that we were given, because as the verses go on, they say that it would be a consequence of this free will that you are given, that some of you would end up as believers and others would end up as hypocrites and disbelievers, and as a result would be either rewarded or punished. So the trust that we were given was this gift of expressing our will, doing what we like, using our own discretion.
So, sir, like if it's our will, then how much that taqdeer, affect that our will? So, as a believer, we believe.
I've tried to explain that the word taqdeer has never been used in the Quran in the sense that we use it as if something has been written down. You'll find the whole of the Quran with devoid of any such mention. What the Quran does tell us is that God is informed of whatever will happen. So it's God's foreknowledge that is always mentioned in the Quran. So that God's foreknowledge is something which only tells us that whatever we do is already known to Him. However, whatever we do will be through our own free will. It's not that God is forcing us to do what we are going to do. So God's knowledge is independent of our actions. He knows the outcome. He knows what will happen. But whatever will happen not because God is going to will it, but because we are going to choose it.
Mm-hmm. So, sir, for example, if somebody getting lost in their business, somebody gets sick, child die in accident. So how then you relate these things with that word taqdeer and will?
These are incidents which are going to happen for everyone. Kullu nafsin za'iqatul maut. Quran says that every person is going to die. The Quran says that things follow their natural form. If you don't work hard, the results will not come. You see, if you don't look after your health, you'll get sick. So there are certain physical laws that this universe is also going to follow. And of course, there are some other laws as well in which you pray to the Almighty to help you, and then His help also comes, and it increases what the input that you gave. So, you have to understand that whatever we do, it's going to have repercussion. It's going to have its consequences. If we do something in the right direction, chances are that things will go in the right direction. But of course, then the chances are also that at times the things which are done in the right direction, they don't end up with the same favorable results as we would have expected. So in most cases, however, as I gave you this example, that if a farmer sows the seeds in his land and cultivates them, and generally if he gets favorable weather conditions, then the crop comes in a good way. But what if he does not look after the crop in the right way, does not give it enough manure or enough sunlight or whatever the needs of that crop is? Then how could he expect the result to be in his favor? So you see, there are certain things which we are required to do, and once we do those things, then of course circumstances are also at times favorable or not. But then we know that these things at times God will let them happen the way we would have planned them to happen, or at times He does not let them happen because of some calamity or some trial or test that He would like us to go through. So basically, what we have to realize is that we are to do what best we think we should do through our own intellect and through our belief system, and let the results spring forth as a favor, as something which was not going to do.
Mm-hmm. Okay. सर ये जो आपने क्रॉप का, ये तो सूरह काफ में भी एक वाकया है ना, जब उन्होंने इंशाल्लाह नहीं कहा तो वो उनकी सारी फसल तबाह हो गई. तो सर वो तो फिर अल्लाह की मर्जी भी हुई ना, मतलब इंसान के पास टोटली.
So you see, that was an incident to explain some certain things. Wala yastasnoon surah, that is in Surah Qalam basically, so I think that was a very specific example. And if you're referring to the same incident which I am referring to in Surah Qalam, it's not that it was a specific orchard that was being referred to. It is basically a parable. It is a parable, an example that was given. It was not a real orchard. And the example was given there. And so therefore, that example, once it was given, the leadership of the Quraysh were compared to the owners of that orchard, how arrogant they have become. Just as the owners of that orchard, they thought that they'll just go and harvest that crop. And then suddenly a storm came and it ravished the whole crop. And they were just left dumbfounded. So I think you have to take things in the way they come. And at times it does happen that things don't go in the favor, in the same sequence as you would have liked them to do, to have happen. But this is not always the case. Generally what happens is that if you have sown your land in the proper way, generally the crop will come, unless God makes his interference due to some reason.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Thank you. Fabia Niazi, you may go ahead.
अस्सलाम वालेकुम रहमतुल्लाह। वैसे अब ये ईसा अलैहिस्सलाम के बारे में बारान रसूल ने जो जिक्र किया है, मेरा उसी से मुतालिक सवाल है। हम जब डिस्कशन सर्कल्स अरेंज करते हैं अपनी सराउंडिंग में, तो हम मुख्तलिफ टॉपिक्स जो हम सीख रहे हैं उनको शेयर करते हैं, जैसे मकसद हयात हो गया, कुरान और सुनन इलाही और इनकलाब और तदरीज। ये इन मौज़ूआत पे गुफ्तगू आसान हो जाती है, समझना भी आसान है। लेकिन जब जैसे हज़रत ईसा अलैहिस्सलाम का मामला है, इस पर उस्ताद जी ने कुल 7 हिस्सों में समझाया है। और उसमें मैंने देखा कि उलूमुल हदीस और कुरानिक ग्रामर, ये 2 मज़ामीन जिन्होंने पढ़े हुए हैं, उसको ज़्यादा बेहतर अंदाज से समझ पाते हैं, क्योंकि इसमें कुछ ऐसी इस्तिलाहात उस्ताद ने इस्तेमाल की, उसूल का इतलाक करके दिखाया और वो समझने के लायक था। अगर मैंने ये स्टडी ना किए होते तो मुझे कभी भी नहीं समझ आती। अब ये इस तरह के मौजू, या जैसे इसरा वल मिराज हो गया, इस तरह का मौजू जब हम लोगों के सामने रखेंगे, तो लोग तो ये मज़ामीन नहीं पढ़े हुए, हम अपनी फैमिली सर्कल में, फ्रेंड सर्कल में ऐसे मौज़ूआत कैसे रख सकते हैं? इसमें तो ये दोनों टूल्स यूज़ होते हैं।
I mean, as I said, you see, it depends on the level of understanding, because I mean, it's not always linguistics that is needed. At times, simple translation, if it is, I mean, understood correctly, it does its job. But as I said earlier on, that it all also depends on whom you're discussing and the topic which is being discussed. Not every topic is advisable to be discussed with family members, because you see, most of our family members, they are geared towards beliefs which they have been taught by their mothers, their grandmothers, and their parents, and the society, and in general they adhere to these beliefs through their emotions. They are not tuned to look at these things through reasoning. So, as I said, I mean, first of all, you should pick and choose that which is the person who is open-minded enough, who would like to engage in a discussion, who is worthy of of this discussion. So choose those people. And it's not always essential that you are aware with in depth with Arabic, unless, of course, the question which is asked needs that depth. Otherwise, as I said, just look up a simple translation. When the Quran says, I give you an example regarding Jesus, the Quran says, "Inni mutawaffika," I'll give you death. I mean, there is no other translation. People who have differed with this translation had to go to great lengths in changing or actually elaborating in a different way, because to them, the hadith literature holds more priority and understanding. Because our hadith say that the Prophet Jesus is said to return, so therefore they had to reinterpret the word mutawaffika, and they interpreted it to mean as if God is going to take him to himself in his living form. But if you look up a dictionary in Arabic, you'll find whenever the word tawaffa is used with an object which is a maf'ul, which is a human being, it can only mean one thing, and that is to give that person death. So whenever you find the maf'ul to be a rajul or a person who is living, then tawaffa, whenever it is used with this maf'ul, it has just one meaning, and that is to give death to that person. I mean, this is slightly technical, but other than that, as I said, unless you just look through these details, you'll find that a simple translation would give you the answer. But what has happened is that because at times we don't stick to that translation, and on most cases, hadith literature modifies our understanding of the Quranic verse, that we are led to change or maybe modify the meaning of what the Quran actually means, because we need to adjust the narratives. So when the narratives say that Jesus was alive, or he was taken and he's going to return. So, I mean, people think that there is such a certain thing which Bukhari or Muslim have mentioned, then maybe you are not understanding the Quran correctly, because how could Bukhari and Muslim would make this error that Jesus is going to return? And if he is to return, then he has to be alive. So you see, there is a whole chain of arguments that you need to understand.
Thank you so much, Dr. Shehzad. Naveed Irfan, you may ask a question now, and this will be the last question of the day.
जी अस्सलाम वालेकुम।
वालेकुम अस्सलाम।
जी डॉक्टर साहब, अभी जो आपने बुक्स मेंशन करी हैं, क्या वो चैट पे मिल जाएंगी मुझे, वो नाम जो कुरान के ऊपर आपने बताई थी?
I'm afraid I don't recall which books are you referring to?
जी, अभी आप जो उन्होंने जो सवाल किया था जिसमें कुछ किताबें कुरान के ऊपर हैं जो गैर मुस्लिमों को दे सकते हैं या नॉन मुस्लिम्स को.
So I was actually referring to any simple translation that you might have without an Arabic text. There are many translations which are published without an Arabic text, like for example, N.J. Dowd's translation or Maulana Wahiduddin Khan's translation. You'll find it without any Arabic text, which is advisable to give because, I mean, they're not going to read Arabic. It's just the simple English translation. And the other thing that I advise is that there are two books that we have published. One of them is called Selections from the Quran, which is like a small book, which is an overview of the Quran in which some of the verses of the Quran are selected and given so that people, before they enter the whole Quran, they just have a glimpse of the Quran. And the second book is Understanding the Quran for Beginners. So people who are non-Muslims or maybe people who are studying the Quran for the first time, they will find the introduction to the Quran to be helpful before they start reading the book.
जी, वो असल में मैंने हमारे एक दोस्त को दी थी, कुरान दिया था अभी, तो उसने देख कर बोला बहुत बड़ा है ये, मैं कैसे मतलब, तो उसने वहीं वो शो किया था.
So that is why this book Selections from the Quran is a very small book. It is meant to give people an overview of the Quran.
Is it available in Hindi? मतलब,
it's not available in Hindi, unfortunately. It's available in English.
Okay. Al-Mawrid Hind may be publishing this book.
You may ask them.
Thank you, Dr. Shehzad, for the talk today. We'll see each other tomorrow, inshallah.
Okay, inshallah.